So, hi, everybody, and welcome back to the outmarket.pro YouTube podcast. I'm happy to have with me Jeffrey Clarke. He is the senior realtor at Clarke Realty and in the St. Pete, Clearwater area of Florida. And we'll talk about, I'll ask him more about what his geographic coverage area is. I think it's a little broader, but glad to have you on and looking forward to talking about what it's like to be a realtor, residential realtor in Tampa Bay, Florida,
Thank you.
and beyond. Yeah.
Yep.
So
And I'm
welcome.
excited to be here. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited.
So let's start there. What is your geographic area what's your footprint? What do you cover?
Yes. Okay. Well, so generally speaking, the way that we approach this question, because we're licensed for the whole state, technically speaking, I could help someone all the way in Key West. I can help someone all the way in Tallahassee with my license. But we're service first. One of our core values is provide value. And so we kind of have a caveat of if you're too far for us to reasonably provide value, we're not going to service it. So we're based out of St. Petersburg. If you're within a serviceable driving distance to St. Petersburg, where we can appropriately get you into that property timely, meet inspectors there, meet vendors there, we'll do it. The threshold for that is somewhere around an hour, plus or minus a little bit, depending on other factors. But yeah, just like you said, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa, those are all fine. As far north as Wesley Chapel, we'll go down to Bradenton, Sarasota. Really, anyone who needs our help will help. And if we can't service that area, we have a network of agents that we can refer people to. So we'll put them in touch with someone who can do a good job.
Great. So let's talk about the origins. How were you drawn into the field?
So I've been in real estate for the better part of a decade now. And I got into real estate when I was 19 years old and I had a man bun and I was just being, a 19-year-old. And I got into this kick of reading all of these like business, self-help, development, investment books. I've always been a reader. Normally I do fiction, but in this phase of life, I was reading a lot of business books. And one of the books that I came across was a very popular book. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have heard. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's very well known. And the book can be summarized in about a sentence. And it basically says, buy assets, reduce liabilities. But a big part of what he was pitching in that book was real estate investing. And so at the time I'm 19, I'm going to school, I'm working at a restaurant, and I'm reading this book and it's talking all about real estate investing. I'm like, man, I really want to get involved in real estate investing. But I had no knowledge and no money. And so I was like, well, how can I solve those two problems? And getting a real estate license was the answer to both. It was like, well, I will get knowledgeable on real estate by working in the industry. I knew I needed to find someone whose wing I could perch under, but I was like, I'll get the knowledge from the industry and then ideally I'll make some money and then I'll use my newfound money, my newfound knowledge to invest in real estate. So that's kind of what pivoted me there. I got licensed, I found a mentor and been on a run ever since.
Awesome. So let's talk about the couple of years that we've just gone through. By the way, since people are tuning in at any time, we're in December of 2022.
Yes,
So
that's right.
this COVID period that we just went through was one of the craziest periods in real estate that I remember. So talk about what that's like. I've heard a comparison of other things like drinking out of a fire hose.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's like that, but what were the positives and what were the pitfalls during that period? Things have slowed down significantly with rising interest rates now, and we'll talk about this period in a moment, but what was it like to drink out of a fire hose, assuming that was the case?
Yeah, it was the case. And for you, for those of us in the industry who also do a good job in the industry, because like with anything else, 10% agents do 90% of the business. So during that period, a lot of people did very well. It was definitely a turbulent time. It was definitely much different day-to-day handling of how transaction works. So let me set the stage just a little bit to provide some context of why it was so crazy, so you can better understand the effects. So 2019 going into 2020, the real estate market was already what we would call traditionally hot. Okay. And a very easy way to decide if a market's a seller's market or hot or a buyer's market and cool is to look at something called the absorption rate. And the absorption rate in simple terms is if no new homes were listed today, just everything that's currently listed stays listed, but no new homes are listed, how long would it take to sell off the current inventory with the current rate of buyer demand? And if you are at an under 6 months absorption rate, that's generally a pretty hot market. If you're above a 6 months absorption rate, it's generally a little bit of a cooler market, and somewhere in the middle is very balanced. And in 2019, we were already very low on inventory and very high in demand. And so going into COVID, we were tight on inventory. Then COVID hits, okay? And price and all those things is just a function of supply and demand, right? So we're already low on supply, demand's pretty high, COVID hits. Well, a couple of wild factors. It was kind of the perfect storm. All these things hit at once because of COVID. First, inventory takes a huge hit. A lot of people don't want strangers in their home. They don't know what's going to happen. Everyone who had plans to list, pause on the plans, right? So inventory stops dead in its track. Demand has not slowed down. Demand's still there. We're still at a hot market leading into COVID, but inventory stops. Okay. In addition to that, rates go down. The Fed starts dropping interest rates. So now inventory has been decreased by people not putting their home on the market. Simultaneously, demand's like a fire that's got gasoline poured on it because all of a sudden money's so cheap. And in addition to that, people found themselves now working from home. Well, if you've lived in a very cramped 1-bedroom apartment for the last 2 years with your girlfriend and your dog, and it's been fine because you get out of the house and you go to the office and you go out at night and whatever, and it's really just a place that you come and lay your head, that's fine. But when people started working from home, they started going, man, sure would be nice if I had a little space around here. Sure would be nice if I had a backyard to take Fido out to. So again, another contributing factor to increased demand. So coming from was already a hot market in 2019, 2020 comes, rates get cut, inventory is low, demand skyrockets. And so what happens to prices? They go up and up and up and up. And it's really great for all parties at that point because interest rates are at historic lows. So even though buyers are paying more for houses, their payments are effectively the same as if they bought these less expensive houses a year or two prior. And sellers are getting crazy appreciation. It was something like 25% appreciation year over year in 2020. That's ridiculous when the median rate of appreciation in Florida is 4%, right? To slightly outpace inflation. So it was wild. Certainly dollar volume was up due to increased purchase price. The agents who already had a good book of business were able to do very well in 2020. So those were all pros. The hardest part was it became extremely competitive for buyers. You saw buyers waiving contingencies that as a broker, I usually, I want my buyers to be as protected as possible on the buy side. And so we always recommend an inspection, financing contingency, appraisal contingency. But in 2020, it was like, if you wanted to buy a house, you got to waive everything. You're basically going in much above list price, waiving all of your contingencies, and you're still competing with 20 offers. So it made it very difficult on people, especially first-time home buyers, especially people who had used financing. And it was very tight. Thankfully, inventory is loosened up a little bit now. Everyone can take a deep breath, and now you're not dealing with 20 offers on every property. But that was COVID for you in a nutshell. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So it was great for sellers agents if you could find the inventory to represent, but
That's
buyers agents and buyers, it was crazy and heartbreaking for a lot of people.
Yeah, and listing agents did very well, especially because when inventory is so tight, a lot of buyers who don't necessarily understand how the representation structure works for realtors would just go to the list agent thinking that would give them an edge, which it doesn't, because you have to present all offers at the same time. But if, let's say, 20 offers were being made on the property, then the list agent might be bringing 4 of them because those 4 buyers contacted them directly. And so they will have a higher percentage chance of double siding the transaction, and that's more revenue in their pocket. And so it was a really good time to be a list agent, really stressful time to be a buyer. But the buyers who did get in, we have not seen in the median price points any downward movement in price. And since that point, and they got locked in at 3% rates, most of them, plus or minus, 0.2%. So the ones who could buy at the time are happy they did. The ones who couldn't are frustrated, but they're getting a little bit more relief now, thankfully.
Was the challenge then for you to find listings, because there had to be a lot of competition, and that's probably where your networking and all of that paid off. But yeah, so that was a
Yeah.
challenge at that point, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, thankfully being very well established in my market at the time and having a big book of business already, it was kind of, I was very well primed to benefit from what was going on in the market. But yeah, it was much harder to find a listing in 2020 than it had been for the years prior, just because, you know, there was less of them to go around.
Let me question you a little more about the position of those people that bought at the peak 2020, 2021. It still was hot. So prices are starting to come down as interest rates are going up. And I've seen some time period increases that an average condo here in this Tampa Bay market at about 200, or that's not average, that's below average probably, but they went from 200 to 300 average during that year and a half period.
Yeah.
So now that rates are up, rates have doubled since January.
Right.
Are they going to be, you know, there are a lot of people that bought at the peak of 07, 08 and got stuck in their homes, were upside down for maybe 10 years. So do you anticipate that people that bought at that peak when they were paying crazy cash offers on top, or cash offers, are they likely to get stuck? I guess we don't really know
We
yet how
don't, but
far it's going to go down.
we don't, and but we can look to kind of what projections are. I'll say we definitely have seen in some markets, specifically luxury markets, that were like hyper hot. So good examples of this are like the luxury condo market in Miami. It has seen a significant decrease already. There were some parts of New York that saw a significant decrease. Fort Lauderdale's felt that a little bit. And so in certain specific niche markets, they have felt pain from that, especially as interest rates have increased. But for our median property, we still have not seen anything that is indicating any sort of significant decrease. I'll put an asterisk on that to say everything in real estate is kind of a leading or lagging indicator, meaning it takes a minute for our data to catch up with what the market's actually doing, right? Because the properties that are being listed today aren't going to go into contract for 30 days. And then we're not going to see what they close for another 30 to 60 days after that. So we're at the very best case scenario, 90 days away at any given moment from seeing what the market actually been doing, right? So, and in a market where interest rates have doubled in 6 months, like you said, that's only 2 90-day periods. So we have catch up that we need to do before we can see how it really affects things. I will say going into this though, we already were at a very, like I said, we were at a very low inventory market going into COVID, and that wasn't resolved coming out of COVID. A lot of people are still not listing their homes. They either bought their homes, they refinanced to a much lower rate during the COVID times. So that's all kind of like ghost inventory, where it's not, they've refinanced during COVID. They're not planning on putting it out right now. It might have been listed, but it's not now because they got a 3% rate and rents are at an all-time high. So our inventory problem is not solved. Now, the Federal Reserve increasing the base interest rates and the effect that has on mortgage rates, even though it's not one-to-one, they're extremely correlated. That has for sure dampened demand. But we had some demand to dampen, and we still are very low in inventory. So my general summary of this is, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think certainly if rates continue to go up to a significant level higher than they are now and then hold there, we're going to see something happen. It's not going to be a 20% plus decline like 2008, 2009, just because the reason that happened was demand completely dried up and inventory completely flooded the market as everyone foreclosed. And there's no way, I mean, I don't see a way that we quadruple our inventory and simultaneously half our demand in the next 12 months to see a decline at that level. What a lot of the major reporting agencies are predicting is pretty much level with inflation appreciation this year. So to look like 9% appreciation, but that's effectively zero when inflation's 9%. And then past that, everyone differs on their projections, but we'll see what happens.
People are not who have bought any time since that they dampened down cut rates during that recession. They're not going to budge because they've got these great interest rates and they can't.
They've got a 3% rate on a 30-year mortgage in an environment where inflation's 8%. It's free money. Everyone who borrowed money during the COVID era has effectively made 5% on their money since that point to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars. So yeah, they're not getting rid of that anytime soon, unless they absolutely have to. But in most markets, rents are at all-time highs. So you're refinanced at an all-time low of interest rate. You can rent at an all-time high rate or a rental rate. So why list it unless you absolutely have to? So we'll see.
So you've talked a little bit about it, but talk about this period, let's say for the next year. And it sounds like the Fed's going to taper off and probably do this 5 basis points today or this week anyway.
Yeah.
And then probably hold off a little bit to see if inflation cools. But we're probably stuck at these rates at least through next year. But let's also point out 6-7% is not horrible over time. And maybe people will not be freaking out so much a year from now, because I'm old enough to remember 18% rates and people were still buying homes at that. So anyway, let's assume rates are going to stabilize probably for the year, maybe start coming down if inflation comes down second half of the year. But so let's take a look at what that would look like.
So you're saying if inflation stabilizes and the Fed does no more increases and no more decreases, they just hold it at the current federal funds rate for the next year. So what may happen?
Yeah. If they drop it, I suspect they're not going to be able to drop it much unless inflation just plummets and they get back to that 4%. So my read of the tea leaves is we're probably at this rate for next year anyway.
Yeah. And I know in Jerome Powell and some of his talks that he's given has said that that's kind of was his plan, is to get to the federal funds rate to a point where he feels like it's sufficient to fight inflation without putting us into a recession, then hold until he makes sure he's accomplished what he's tried to accomplish. So I mean, your tea leaf reading is probably fairly accurate, with the caveat of none of us know what the heck these guys are gonna do. They could come back at any moment. I know, like, it's been funny watching all of the news as it comes out. People expect they're like, oh, a quarter, a 25 basis point increase. And they're like 75 basis points. And then the market tanks 4%. And so what do I think would happen in there? Well, I think one that's probably the most likely thing to happen right now. So most of the people who are making predictions are predicting based off of that series of events. So I'll default to them because I don't have a crystal ball. And I think it's going to be kind of like what we said, where the home appreciation might look on paper nice at 8-9%, but that's just an inflation adjusted flat. It's just carrying it along. I think what'll happen over the next few years, if the market, if the Federal Reserve does a good job balancing on this tightrope where we are not getting into entrenched inflation and we have a whole wage price spiral, and we're at the same time, we're not falling into a recession, they just kind of go in for the soft landing. If they can hit that, I think over the next few years, we'll continue to see pretty much on pace with inflation, housing appreciation, such that the zoomed out 5 to 10 year average looks like the median appreciation in Florida prior to that point, maybe slightly higher. So we're over a 5 to 10 year period, we find our way closer to somewhere in the 5 to 10% appreciation range over the 10 years, rather than the last 2 years has been, especially in Pinellas, like 20%, 26% year over year. You just can't do that forever. Houses would cost $100 million if we did that for the next 10 years, Right. So that's my guess. I think so. thesis statement, probably on pace with inflation appreciation over the next few years, especially in moments of uncertainty. Uncertainty is the hard part. Where are rates going to go in 6 months? If we knew rates were going to be flat for the next 6 months, I think a lot of buyers jump in the market. A lot of buyers are on hold right now because one, interest rates are a little high, but mostly it's because they want to know if they go higher, our price is going to drop. And so should I just wait to buy until I know where things are? And once the chips fall where they will, and the Fed says, hey, this is where we're at, we're going to hold this now for 6 months, 12 months. I think you see kind of people rushing back in a little bit, and that'll keep us with that appreciation at inflation's rate.
But if inventory doesn't pick up and it's still really low inventory, then, and the buying continues to slow down, at least to this level, then prices should drop, shouldn't they?
Well, okay. So let me clarify a statement where we are still very low in inventory, but inventory's trend line is rising. So it was low before COVID, was even lower, crazy low, like 10-year low during COVID. And then it's been climbing back to a more moderate level now. We are still at a point where inventory is lesser than demand. So it's still technically a hot market, but the inventory trend line is increasing. I expect that to continue at some moderate rate until we've at least equalized a little bit. So though inventory is low, I don't think it will keep dropping right now. No, I think it's the opposite with buyers. I think I think demand will slightly increase if we can get some clarification on what the Fed's actual intentions are with this market. And so if we do get some sort of signal that, hey, we're going to hold for a little bit, I think that gives it a little pop, and that'll be what helps sustain it as inventory levels continue to rise, and what'll keep that flat with inflation. So appreciating, but at the inflation's level, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, that was a fun exercise.
Let me clarify, I don't have a crystal ball. So we can clip this in a year and see how wrong or right I am. But my general advice to people is, buy beneath your means, buy a house as only based off of if it'll cash flow or if you're going to stay somewhere for the next 5 years. Other than that, you're speculating. So.
Got it. And with as crazy of a period as we've just been through, and including this dramatic rise in rates, because I don't think it's happened this fast ever before.
Right.
I don't think anybody's going to hold your feet to the fire on your predictions.
Someone will find a way to, but
well, it won't be me, and
okay,
I won't be showing your video in front of you to say, look.
Right. Yeah. Don't blame me if I'm wrong, but do praise me if I'm right.
Okay. So now let's move and just talk about what it's like to be a realtor, and just in general. And let's focus on residential since that's your primary focus. So let's talk about some of the rewards that you experience. And I know you focus on a lot of different categories within residential. So let's talk about it. And you know what, maybe let's start with watching a client walk through their house. And I'm getting goosebumps because I've experienced it one time where we did a lot of looking, and we walked in and check every box immediately. It was like not even a question. So what's that like, to walk through somebody's dream house that they've done their research and this is it? What's that moment like with a client?
It's great. You only really get that moment once the deal's done, because there's a difference between when they walk through it at the first time and it checks all the boxes. They get very excited, but there's also nervousness, right? And it's very like, it's kind of like you don't want to completely get all of your hopes up because you still have a whole real estate transaction to go through. You still have to make an offer. What if they don't take it? It's like a whole thing. And so, but that's when you can start feeling the excitement, and it's a nice positive energy. And then when you're finally done and you're at the closing table and you can slide the keys over and we always take a photo for social media and we give it to them so that they can post or whatever. And, people have their like driver's license smile, and they have their out with friends smile, right, for Facebook. And then they have their like, I just closed on my house smile. And it's, they're always goofy. Like they don't, because you can't hold it back. You're not doing it for aesthetics. You're doing it because you're giddy and exciting. And yeah, dude, it's a big joy. Especially because like, if you think about real estate, like the real estate transaction, like when would someone need a residential realtor? Especially when it's their house, like you're talking about a client who's buying a home for them to live in. And there's different joys that go with the investor side, which we can talk about if you want to later. But for that person, you like as their realtor, you're getting involved in their life in almost always it's some sort of transition phase. They're either adding or subtracting a city. They're adding or subtracting a family member. Maybe they're getting divorced, maybe they're having a baby. They're adding or subtracting a job. They had to move here for work, or they're doing this or the other. It's always at some big transition mark where emotions are high, negative or positive. The act of buying a house or selling a house is also like a very high tension thing. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of moving parts. Like the average real estate transaction, they say has like 12 people involved with it. And honestly, that feels low to me if you're including like all the processors for the loans and things. So it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of stress and it's a lot of hassle. And to be able to like help someone through that to accomplish something that they want to accomplish in what's already a very high tension part of their life is extremely rewarding, even when it's challenging. And it is extremely challenging. I think people have a misconception of how easy it is to be a real estate agent. But when you're done and you get to slide those keys, like the reason it's so nice to see that person smile is because you've watched them stress for the last 30 days, 90 days, 18 months. Some people, I had closed with a buyer that we were looking for houses for 2.5 years. Imagine looking for 2.5 years and then you finally get the keys. So, it's not just about the check and like, oh, it's fun because they got their house. It's like, it's fun because they got their house, but it's fun because they got their house and I saw their journey and I know how stressful it was for them. And now that it's done, it's like a wave of endorphins they get to experience, which I get a contact high from.
Very good.
Yeah, I love it.
So why don't you talk a little bit about the discovery phase that you work on with your clients first?
Yeah.
You're finding out what it is that they want,
Right.
what their parameters are.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about going through that phase. That's I guess discovery is probably the best way I, as a layperson, can think of it.
No, that's an apt way to describe it. Yeah, it's a little different for every person, but it's also pretty much the exact same for every person. It's just different people behave in different ways. We try to work to our clients' specific personality type. But it always starts with a conversation of wants and needs. And it's important to differentiate between those two things because unless you're custom building a new construction home, you're not going to get every single thing you want or every single thing you need unless you have an unlimited budget, right? Or, where you can literally wait to find that. So we talk over wants and needs. We generally advise cast a wide net from the jump. You ideally are giving yourself enough time, understanding that the average real estate transaction takes 45 days. So you want to work backwards from there, meaning contract close, 45 days. You want to work backwards from there to know how long you should be starting on the front end. And so you want to give yourself enough time. We'll cast a wide net. As we sort through the options, we can refine down. The more feedback I get sent back, the better we can help. So I tell people, tell me things that you see that you like and tell me things that you see that you don't like. So that just helps us narrow it down. And then it's a very person by person process. Some people want listings sent to them daily. Some people want listings sent to them weekly. Some people send me listings because they're refreshing Zillow every 30 seconds because they can't take their eyes off of it, right? So it's about playing to that person's preferences, but it always just starts with what do you want, what do you need, and when do you want to accomplish it? And then we custom tailor how we're going to make that happen for them.
Boy, the business has really changed over the years with the internet. I mean,
Yeah.
Think about how many houses you had to walk people through at the beginning of your career compared to now
Yeah.
with virtual walkthroughs. I don't see
Yeah.
as much of that, but I'm sure it's growing, and the
It is.
photographs are getting better.
Mhm.
Although, how do you, if you're taking the photographs, and you probably have actually, I know that you have a
Yeah.
professional photographer to do it.
Right.
How do you squeeze that far into the corner
Mhm.
to make that room look so big? I guess it's a fisheye lens
Yeah.
also, isn't it?
The answer is thousands of dollars of photography equipment and professional editors. It's, real estate photos. There are certain things that there's certain regulations. So like you have to have truth in advertising. You cannot misrepresent the property. But photographers know how to get right up to that line sometimes. Sometimes you see a photo and then you go walk through the house and you're like, what the heck? Especially they can do virtual staging. I mean, a bunch of nonsense. It's quite remarkable. And to your point about virtual showings and 3D walkthroughs, I think COVID was responsible for a lot of that. Before COVID, I think maybe once I like sent an out of town client a video of a property. Like I walked through with a video and then texted them the video or something, maybe one time. Since then, I mean, it's definitely not a majority of people, but it is extremely common now, or at least much more so than it was. So yeah, just, hey, FaceTime me, or here's the virtual walkthrough. Let me know what you think. And people make sight unseen offers off of that. And that's just the world that we live in. Back in the day, Mark, realtors had like a yellow book, like a yellow pages book every week. That was like the MLS. And so when you'd call your agent, they would take out that week's book and fan through and find the 20 listings that would work for you. And you'd go out all day Saturday. And by the time you went out there, 7 of them were under contract, but you're there anyways, might as well check them out. And then, you'd get back and you'd have to write up an offer and fax it, and you wouldn't hear back from 2 days. Now, the second a property is listed, if someone signed up on my website with an account, that second they'll get an email. Hey, this is listed. They could press request a showing. We could go out, do a showing in an hour, write up an offer, sign it from our phones. And within 2 hours of a property being listed, you can have a signed offer from both parties. So it's totally changed the way the game works. It's ridiculous,
Wow.
honestly. Yeah.
And the actual 3D walkthroughs, they're probably at a certain dollar value of the house and up.
Right.
It's got to be pretty expensive to do that technology.
Yeah, they're not cheap. There's kind of 2 tiers you can do. So Zillow, which realtors have a love-hate relationship with Zillow, which we can touch on if you want to. But Zillow has a 3D walkthrough built in and integrated with on Zillow's app and Zillow's website, which you have to do from your phone, and you just go through, and it works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it can kind of take you zone by zone, room by room. Then you have kind of like a full-scale 3D Matterport tour, which is you can move smoothly just like you're walking through the house. And that's whereas the Zillow one's free, that's very expensive. So yeah, there's definitely a price point where underneath that point, agents are going to be disincentivized to do it because it might not help move the listing. And usually with a listing agent, they're going to be paying for photos out of their pocket. It's not passed on to the seller, it's out of the agent up front, and the agents only get paid if it sells. And so a lot of agents just don't want to do anything if they don't think it'll make a reasonable contribution towards getting the property sold. So you tend to see more 3D walkthroughs on $1 million condos than you do $50,000 mobile homes.
So the agent bears the financial responsibility for the photos?
It's negotiable. I mean, but I would be as bold as to say 90% of the time when you see professionally photographed listings, the agents pay for it. It is by far, in a way, the majority that cover their photos. It's just one of the things that's included. It's kind of like we take on our shoulders the burden of marketing your property. We ask for a fee that we feel like is competitive, and part of marketing your property is make sure that we have good photos. So the only times I know where the agents don't pay for the photos is if someone contracts like a flat fee broker to just put their property in MLS but not do anything else. Then the owner might pay for their own photos, but they never do. They take iPhone photos and then they sit on the market for 70 days and then do 2 price reductions and go under contract and cancel them. And they end up listing with someone anyways, who then pays for their photos. So
right. Let's talk about other types other than just owner purchased homes. Let's talk about investment properties. From a prior conversation, I know that you have a specialty with Airbnbs and
Yeah.
investment properties. So
Yeah.
maybe, since Airbnb is so hot right now, let's talk about that, because I think
Yeah.
that's a niche of yours too.
I think short-term rentals. So actually, I have a pet peeve of Mark, and I'm going to bring it up because I'm trying to spread the word on this as much as possible. Okay, this is
And
my
I
mission.
won't
This has
take
been
it
my mission.
personally. If it's a
Okay.
reaction to
Okay.
what I said, I won't take it personally.
Okay. Well, I mean personally, so take it how you want it. But
Okay.
no, have you heard? Like people say Kleenex, but it's not like Kleenex is the brand. It's really tissue paper. But if they have
Okay.
tissue paper, they call it a Kleenex. Same thing with short-term rentals. So everyone says Airbnb, and Airbnb, God bless them, have a vast majority of the market share for sure. But there's other amazing companies, and if on Airbnb, you should be on these other companies like Verbo, Furnished Finder. You should have a direct booking site. There's a lot of other ways to tackle short-term rentals as an investment type, and I feel, especially lately, Airbnb has gotten a little bit of bad press, which is just a very vocal minority. But I think if I'm trying to change the lexicon. I want people to say short-term rentals instead of Airbnbs. Right. I'm taking that single-handedly on my shoulder. So okay, so let's talk short-term rentals. So I think right now it is by far and away the best possible avenue of real estate investing to the open market. Now, there's pros and cons to it. It's not going to work in every market. It's not going to work with every property. It's not going to work with every person. So, but if it's the same amount of money going into any sort of type of real estate investment project, if it were my money, I'm allocating it towards a short-term rental. And there's a couple different reasons for that. But first, who am I to even comment? Well, I've done it all. I've bought a home that I've lived in that appreciated significantly. I flipped multiple properties successfully, always profitable. Never lost in a real estate deal yet. Knock on wood. It'll happen surely at some point. I've done long-term rentals. I did duplex. It was amazing. And right now I have 2 short-term rentals. And so I've covered all, and I've never enjoyed investing style as much as I enjoy doing short-term rentals. I've never gotten the kind of returns I'm getting like I've gotten out of short-term rentals and that I've seen other clients get out of short-term rentals. I just think there's a massive opportunity here if done right and if done well. And while I think that short-term rentals will always be more profitable than long-term rentals, just out of basic supply and demand stuff, because they are more work. So if ever there was a time where the returns are the same, people would transition to long-term rentals, thereby cut inventory from short-term rentals and bring the returns back. But I think for the period of time that these returns are what they are, people are kind of silly not to trying to get involved in it if they're in a market that makes sense.
Okay, so what about if you are not in the general area as your short-term rental? How much of a hit do you take having to pay somebody to take the roll of toilet paper? These people are very demanding right now. Their expectations are very high for short-term rentals, not Airbnbs.
Right.
So what if you're an absentee owner? You're owning, and I think your situation, I think you have some in the Orlando area, no, Gainesville. Right? So how is that? How much of a detriment is that as an owner?
Well, a lot of it can be systemized. So you really need hands on deck. You don't need your hands on deck. You just need hands on. Does that make sense? So like you're not going to be cutting your own grass. You just need a guy who's going to cut your grass for you. You're not going to clean your own house if you're not local. So you just need a guy who's going to clean your house for you. And so you could just go down the list. Everything can be outsourced. I generally recommend anyways that someone investing in short-term rentals, unless they have a real estate or a hospitality experience, that they don't manage their own property anyways. You should just pass it off to a professional. Then you don't have to deal with any of the hassles, because there's a lot of hassles. It's not passive. It's a part-time job, basically. And if you have a manager, then it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in New York and own a property in Largo, which we have the other company that does short-term rental management. And that's literally one of the clients we're onboarding this week. is they have a beautiful property in Largo. Largo is using market for short-term rentals in New York. They sent it over to us. We're getting it on this week, and they're not going to do. They're going to feel like it's a long-term rental in the work that they do, but they're going to feel like it's a short-term rental in the checks that get deposited to their account every month. So being non-local, in summary, to answer your question, being non-local is not a problem. You just will have to outsource things that you would be doing yourself, maybe if you were local.
Okay. Let's talk about what are the profits that somebody can expect? And I know it's going to vary widely between a property on the beach and a property in the city. Just talk a little bit about what kind of returns people can expect today.
Yeah, right. So I'll parrot up the points that you made, which are, it varies very much. So it varies based off of your location, and varies based off of what kind of property you have. What's very interesting about comping, meaning checking comparable properties for their to estimate what your average revenue may be. Comping properties for short-term rentals is much more difficult than comping properties for, like, for instance, what's a home worth? Because for what's a home worth, you can be very specific, and there's not a lot of variables, right? Like, there's slightly better, slightly worse condition you could adjust for, their size, bedroom, bathroom count. You can get pretty good. Term rentals, there's on 10 properties that are within a mile of each other, it's like, well, more professionally managed, and 2 of them are being used part-time. The other 5 are very poorly decorated. So all those caveats being said, a good general rule of thumb that I hear in the community is you can usually get about double what you would get if you were long-term renting. That's a very general ballpark. Now, for the short-term rental management company that we have, which is called Owl Property Management, we have back-end pricing softwares that allow us to grade by markets. The higher letter grade, it's just like grade school. You want an A, you don't want an F, right? The higher graded rating you get in any given market, the higher that gap is going to be between what you can make as a long-term rental versus a short-term rental. So it might not be double, it might be triple, for instance, something like that. I can use, one of my properties as an example, where it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in Gainesville. It's about 1,400 square feet. I'd say it's moderately upgraded, not like crazy luxurious, but new counters, new floors. It looks good. It feels nice when people walk in. It would probably long-term rent somewhere in the ballpark of $1,800, give or take $100. And the gross income it's generating per month is somewhere in the order of magnitude of, it's 50 grand a year. So whatever that translates into, a little over 4 grand a month. So that's about double, slightly over double. But it's great because.
And that's after management fees.
Well, I'm the manager, so I do this myself. So, you would take that into account, but even so, like, I'll do back the napkin math with you real quick, if this is something that interests, because for the people who are interested in short-term rentals, they will like this and understand this and be grateful for this. But that property, the total payment every month is somewhere in the ballpark of $1,400. It's like 13 and change. Okay. So if it was long-term rented, it would, with management, long-term rental people usually take 10%. I'd get about 1,800. They take 10% off the top. That's 180. So we're down to 16. I'm not responsible for, utilities. So that's a wash, but I might have to do like lawn maintenance, everything. At the end of the day, I maybe cash flow $150, which is not bad. It's fine. Like, there's equity buildup, there's tax write-offs, but the cash flow on that probably be about $150. That's with management, everything. Long-term rental with these numbers, even if I were paying a manager what our fee is, which is 20%, and that's competitive in the market. Off the top, so that brings it down to 4. For income, the housing payments about $1,400, like we talked about. I do have to pay for lawn care, internet, the utility bill, so that totals up probably another $400. Let's call it $500 to err on the side of caution.
And so you're talking short-term rentals. I think you misspoke and said long-term.
Right. This is now for a short-term rental. So long-term rental, we said we're going to cash flow about $100. Now with short-term rental, we were at 5 grand. We took 20% off the top. So now we're at 4 grand coming into me. Out of my pocket is my $1,400 a month payment, plus another, let's call it $500 for utilities, internet, pest control, lawn care. Okay, so we're at $1,900. That spread is still $2,000, right? And if I have a management company, I'm not doing anything. It's the same amount of work for me as it is long-term rental. I maybe get 2 calls a year. Hey, do we have your permission to maintain the HVAC? Hey, are you okay if we send a wood rock guy out to replace the siding? Something simple that you would deal with long-term rental. But in those 2 examples, same property, both being professionally managed, one's cash flowing $100, the other's cash flowing $2,000. And so this is why there's opportunity there. Again, it varies on market. You really have to be one of the top performers in your market, and you have to do analysis. It's not get rich quick. It takes a lot of money out of pocket to get started. But if done right and if done well, the returns are just, I mean, who wouldn't take $2,000 a month over $100 a month?
Right.
Yeah.
What are the changes that you could foresee that are reasonable to foresee that could change this equation? Because we probably, we've not had this sort of option before. It's only been short-term rentals. Well, you could have if you did Craigslist.
It's totally different, right? Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's never been like this where there's been such substantial demand and it's been so in vogue or so in the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak, where it's front of mind for people when they travel.
And friction-free.
Right, and friction-free. It's so easy. 5 different apps, and a swipe of the finger, you could book a whole house instantly.
So what could change that would change this equation and nix the deal?
Right. Well, I think the simplest answer, I have a couple thoughts on this, if you'll indulge me. I know I like to go along, but this is just because you're asking me about stuff I'm passionate about, so I go.
It's great. No, you're great. Rock and roll.
The simplest answer is a big increase in supply or a sharp decrease in demand. Both will have the same impact of reducing returns to investors, right? Imagine if I'm the only house in my neighborhood doing short-term rentals, and then 2 years later there's 10 of them, you can imagine that my bookings might be down, right? So that's one thing that I think is certainly going to happen, is supply is going to increase. The question is, will demand continue to increase in short-term rentals the way that it has been? Because right now, even though supply is increasing, demand's increasing at an even faster rate. So even though there's twice as many Airbnbs as there were 2 years ago, there's 4 times as many bookings happening. That's a made up number, but the ratio is probably about right. But if one of those 2 things change, it'll definitely slow things down. And I do expect that over time, markets reach an equilibrium, which is to say, if I had $100,000 to invest, let's say I'm going to put $100,000 down on a house and finance the rest and do whatever. Right now, between my 2 options, the returns are so much higher with Airbnb. I'm going to just do that. And so you're going to have a lot of people just picking that. So let's think through what happens when we do that. Okay, well, it takes supply away from long-term rentals, right? Demand for long-term rentals is the same or increasing. But now I'm an investor, I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to take that supply away from what would have been a long-term rental and make it a short-term rental. Okay, so I've slightly reduced supply from long-terms. I've slightly increased supply in short-term rentals. And that happens at scale, because as long as the returns are super disproportionately large, people are going to pick the option that returns them more money. So over time, there will be some sort of equilibrium where that will cause long-term rent prices to increase and short-term rent prices to decrease until the decision is a little more level. And now when someone's looking, they're not saying what's the difference between $100 and $2,000. Maybe it's the difference between $500 and $1,000. And even though that's still double, it's also, there's a lot more risk. Insurance is higher. You have to completely furnish a house every 2 years. You know what? I might as well just do long-term rental. So there's an equilibrium. It's kind of the same as when you want to invest in a CD, like a 6-month or 12-month CD versus buying an index fund, right? Is when index funds start looking a little bit more risky, but CDs are back up to 5% or something. You're like, well, I'll take a guaranteed 5% than a historical rate of 8 if I know it's locked in. So I think over time, there'll be an equilibrium. It'll balance out. I still think you'll make more money with short-term rentals. In that case, it just won't be quite as large of a gap. Outside of that, cities can do a little bit of regulation, thankfully, or not, depending on who you ask. In Florida, I think it was 2011, the state on the state level said no city or municipality can change, can regulate or restrict the amount of days that a short-term rental can exist for. The caveat to that is markets that already had those rules in place can continue to enforce them. So cities like St. Petersburg, Clearwater, areas that were very touristy beforehand and kind of had this issue and had pre-existing regulation, they can keep their rules, but they can't change them from here on out in the state of Florida. So cities like Largo, for instance, that is an A market for short-term rentals, you're protected. The city's not gonna be able to shut you down. Now, will they require that you have a fire extinguisher? Yes. Do they, or can they say, hey, you have to put contact info inside and do this and that? Yes. Do you have to be licensed with the state? Absolutely. But they can't just turn it off on you. So you don't really run that risk. So as a final summary point there to answer your question, like what would make the music stop? I just think the song will just slow down. The gap will be spread. People continue to invest in it until the returns are equalized, or slightly more than equalized, to compensate for the additional work and risk. And then it'll just be another investing style that returns slightly higher for people who don't mind a little extra work or farming it out to a management company. So all that cohesive, that makes sense. I know it was a lot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I got it. So it's really supply,
Right.
An over increase in supply,
Right.
that could reduce the profits and
Right.
make it less attractive.
Exactly. That's
Got it.
correct. Yeah.
What else would you like to talk about? I've asked lots of questions. Anything about the rewards of what you do, the drawbacks and challenges of what you do, anything about your role as a realtor that you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it. I really enjoy what I do. It's one of those things where I feel so blessed to have found this career by the path that I did, and also to be mentored by my mentor. I'll shout her out. Her name is Betsy Pepin, and I worked under her for 6 years, maybe something like that, and just totally changed my life. She was nothing but a force for good. She showed me how to be a business person and how to do a good job, and that you receive value proportional to the value you contribute to a system. So just focus on providing value and the rest will sort itself out. And I just think that that's the best way to approach so many things in life, is to try to give value first. Because if you focus on that as your key indicator, the rest sorts itself out. The rest just falls into place. Starting the other way, focusing only on what you can get, is kind of like putting the cart before the horse if you're thinking long-term, right?
Mm-hmm.
So no, I mean, I just absolutely love what I do. I think we had a great talk. I get so fired up, dude. This is how I like what I've been doing this for the better part of a decade. I still ramble. I still get excited and get giddy, and no, I think we're good. And I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my observation, is that if you got any more excited, you would be falling off the couch.
Yeah.
So that you're right. So I'm glad that you didn't. Well, if somebody is, I know what we can talk about just briefly.
Sure.
Let's talk about this area, the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah.
I've been here for a couple of years. There is a lot to be said about this area. It is growing in population, but talk up the area a little bit. And maybe if you're more enthused about St. Pete, Clearwater, Pinellas County, focus on that. If you're as enthused about Tampa, just talk up the area a little bit. Let's pull out your Chamber of Commerce bonnet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think anyone who lives here knows we got something special going on, and word's gotten out. Clearly, if you look at the population numbers, we're not, the theme of this talk has been supply and demand. And, there's only so much supply of land here, and there sure is a lot of demand. And so you can just look at the numbers and see people like it here, and there must be a reason for that. I'm a Florida boy. I've been here my whole life. I was born in Florida. I travel away, but I'll live here and die here my whole life. I couldn't see it any other way. And I've lived all around. Right now I live in St. Pete, but I've lived in Brandon and Wesley Chapel and Odessa. And I remember being a teenager and going to Clearwater Beach. And so for the last couple of decades, I've watched these markets grow into, be what they are today. And it's like,
Pinellas County is either the most or one of the most densely populated counties in Florida.
Yeah.
And although it certainly doesn't feel that way. But go ahead.
No, it surprisingly doesn't. You would expect it to feel a little bit more cluttered, but you can also just see by the level of investment that's happening through here. I mean, it's just all focused on making it a bigger, better place. When they built that $100 million pier in St. Pete, that's an investment in the city and the culture they want to be in. I don't know if you've been out there recently when they have all the lights up and everything. It's magical. It's literally like you're in well, I was gonna say a winter wonderland, but it doesn't ever quite become winter here. So you're in a summer wonderland. And I don't know. I mean, what's not to love? Beaches, you're close to a bunch of beaches. You're in a great state, good weather, sunshine, and nice people.
The arts community is incredible, visual,
right,
as well as performing. That was one of the things that was important to me on where to locate. Even if I don't participate in it, there's something about having that level of arts activity that really improves. Sarasota is close by and really an arts mecca.
Yes.
The weather.
Have you been to the Ripley's Museum out there, or not Ripley's? Ringling. Yes, Ringling.
Yeah,
have you been out there?
The Ringling Circus Museum is one of my favorites.
It's
and
amazing.
The Imagine Museum in St. Pete.
The glass place.
With the art glass is incredible.
Phenomenal. So the tickets to that were like $5 the day that I went. And so I did not know what I was getting into. My girlfriend was like, oh, let's go look at this place. It seems cute. Like, yeah, okay, let's go look. $5. I wasn't expecting much. And you walk through, and I won't, no spoilers for anyone listening, but when we say glass sculptures, I mean, unlike anything you've ever seen, please go check it out. It is worth the $5, 100%. They also have, what's the place called? It's the Interactive Art Museum in that same area. Kind of like Mayo Wolf, but not Mayo Wolf. Drawing a blank. I can't remember. Just whoever's listening, just Google Interactive Art Museum, St. Pete. It's a really cool place. And we've been going to Spitfire Comedy a lot. They have like improv nights and things like that. So there's just always things.
I'll test out a theory on you. It was an idea that came to me that a lot of people that don't like Florida, we'll wrap up here in just a second. Well, a lot of people who don't like Florida say that they miss the seasons. They miss the 4 distinct seasons. And as I was walking my dog the other day, I thought there are seasons. You just have to pay a little more attention, and identified what I think if you had to describe 4 seasons in the Tampa Bay area, what they would be. So let me test them out on you.
Okay, test them out.
There's hot.
Yeah.
There's hot and rainy every afternoon. There is a little bit nippy because it'll get down into the 50s. And then there's just perfect. So those are my 4 seasons for Tampa Bay. What do you think?
I think you hit the nail on the head.
So
I think that's spot on.
If somebody would like to contact you to find their place in the sun here in Tampa Bay area, or a little broader, how can they reach you?
You can reach me at my cell, which is 727-444-0277. You can also go to clarkerealtyflorida.com, and you can browse around homes, fill out a contact form on there, and we'll have someone be in touch with you. And that's Clarke with an E, and then Florida, the full word. CLARKE, Realty Florida, the full word.com. You can just Google, if you Google Clarke Petersburg, our business page comes up and people can click around on there. In the age of, I feel like in the age of 2022, all you need is someone's name and generally what they look like. And in 5 minutes, you can have their whole bio and people can find everyone I've been friends with for the last 30 years and my whole life story.
There was a little bit of a blip with the internet. So go ahead and say the URL again.
Sure. It's Clarke. Yes. So if anyone wants to get a hold of me, they can reach me at my cell, which is 727-404-0277, or they can go to clarkerealtyflorida.com, spelled Clarke with an E, Realty Florida, the full word.com, and they can fill out our contact form.
Got it. Well, if you had been any more enthusiastic about this podcast, you would have broken the lens of your camera. So thanks so much for the enthusiasm.
Thank you. Yes.
For what you're doing. And it is a matter of loving what we do. And they're not, as I observe people, I don't see a whole lot of people that really love what they do. So I think we should count ourselves as fortunate that we do. And
that's why every time someone asks me how I'm doing, I go, I'm blessed. That's my go-to response. And it's because exactly what you just said. I mean, it could be much worse, put it that way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast. And we'll do another one in a quarter and see what the market looks like then. Talk about it then.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're looking at people doing fun, incredible things and exploring as much as we can about different businesses. So tune back in. We're doing this about weekly. So, and check out the contact information of Jeffrey down below and more information about outmarket.pro, which is who sponsors it. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.